All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm an applications and technical support specialist based in Austin, Texas. Some of you might remember my voice if you called into the support hotline. We did a remote session together. So, yeah, what I'll be going over today is becoming a master of tracking in Imaris. So this is time-lapse data. We're going to be doing some 2D and some 3D time-lapse data today, and we're going to start off where my colleague Amanda left off last week, and we're going to jump straight into some of the manual tools, editing tracks, exporting the data, and how we can use the distance calculations to help us out. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the software. All right, so what I have here is our very basic swimming algae data set. I'm going to start off with a spot object. And what I want to show you is that we have a button here that says skip automatic creation, edit manually. Now when I click that, it's going to skip out of the creation wizard and I'll get to the little pencil tab, the edit tab of the spots object. So the first thing I want to do is just play through this a little bit, and I'll just step through so we can see these little algae are swimming around. Now if I want to manually track these, and there's a lot of reasons I might want to do that. This is a fluorescent data set, but if you have DIC images or phase contrast, which Imaris really isn't optimized for, or if there's a certain feature you want to track, you put the mouse in select mode. Make sure to check this box Auto Connect to Selected Spot and enable Delay Before Auto Advancing. And what you can do is zoom in here. You can hold down the Shift key, you can left click, and you can actually manually track anything you want. You can track a spot, you can track the tip of something, you can track a protrusion, you can track anything you want actually, and you can actually see that track getting built up, the path along which I'm clicking. And if I want to track something else, just stop holding Shift, unclick, and you can see this little bit of the track is already time-based color coded. So I can go back here, and maybe I want to start over here. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to start building a different track. So it is possible to fully manually track something in an image, in a 2D or 3D image. Now right now the cursor is being placed exactly where I'm putting it. If I want to though, I can go back here, and if I go to some of these spots, you can see the exact position of that spot, X, Y, Z. You can see the exact diameter of that spot. You also have the ability to recenter a spot if you want to. So clicking that will just recenter it based on the current visible channels. And you'll see that the track actually did adjust slightly, and it recentered based on the highest intensity inside those spots. So that just helps eliminate some of the bias. Again, I'll click that track and I'll click recenter, and you see there, it just helps eliminate some of the bias of where exactly my mouse is. It's now centered on the brightest intensity inside that sphere at any time point. Now that sphere diameter is based on my mouse cursor, my cursor size. So I'm using the mouse wheel right now to make it bigger or smaller. So if I click over here with a really big, hold down Shift, I'm making a big spot. If I click over here with a really small, I'm making a small spot. And obviously I don't want that track. So what do I do if I accidentally made a track that I don't want? Well, here it is, time point 1, time point 2. Right now, on the track edit tab, that's the little, looks like a marker with some little dots behind it. I think it's supposed to be a connect the dots icon. I've got a couple different options for what our mouse can select over here. Now by default, the option is mouse selects track. So you can see that when I click on any one of these objects, the whole track of objects is selected. That's pretty easy. If I want to delete this track, I can select either of these. Then I can go to the edit tab and click delete. And now it's gone. Before we get too much into track editing though, I did want to go over a couple of the other tools here. So let's say instead of manually tracking every single time point, I just want to start somewhere and I want to have it track for me from that point forward. What I can do is I can hold down Shift, left click, and put a spot right there. All right, and we'll see I have one lonely spot here at the first time point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that spot, and I'm going to go over here on the left, and there's a big button for Create Track. Now when I click on that, you'll see a little window pop up, and what it actually does is it gives me a miniature version of the entire spot detection wizard, including the track detection portion of it. So I pick your channel, you pick your estimated diameter. Again, that's going to be based off of the diameter that I already made my spot. And then you pick your tracking algorithm. Autoregressive motion is what I want to do here. You pick your max distance, gap size, and end time points. Again, Amanda went over all this with you guys last time. If you need a refresher on that, just go back and watch that webinar. So actually, when I click OK, what's going to happen is it uses that very first spot that I made, and it goes through the rest of the data set and creates a track for me. So I don't have to track the entire image. I can just track one specific cell of interest. And that can be pretty useful, especially if you have a really crowded data set, or there's very few cells that you're looking to track and you don't want to have to track all of them at the same time. You can use this to sort of hone in on specific cells that you find are very interesting or something like that. Also, this is useful if there's something that's maybe moving really fast, you want to manually track it, and then it starts moving slowly. You can track the slow portion automatically after you've tracked it manually for a few steps. So we give you total freedom to sort of mix and match between manual and then the semi-automatic tracking like that. All right, so here I have a couple little track segments. I do want to go over here to the Track Edit tab, and I want to show you that we can see, if we rebuild here, all three of our tracks. And so I want to go over what all of these do here, all the different settings. So right now, we have, like I said before, mouse selects track. So when I click on an object, the entire track is selected. But at the very top, we have mouse selects object. And when I click on that, you'll see just one spot is selected, not the entire track. So what's this useful for? Basically, if I'm tracking along here and I realize at a certain point that this track is incorrect, or I want to change it, or something like that, I can come here to this spot and at that very exact time point, and if I hit the break track button, it'll break it right before that exact point. Now, the opposite is also possible. You can select exactly 2 points, and what I did to do that is hold down the Control key. On a Mac, it's going to be the Command key. You can select exactly 2 points, and you can hit join, and it'll join that track back together. And in fact, I'm just going to break this apart again. Even if you have mouse selects track, you can select multiple track segments, and you can hit the join key. And that makes the entire track join back together again. Now, there is a full disconnect button over here that I caution you to use, because what that'll do is that'll completely break up everything here in the tracked object. Now, I personally don't use that very much unless you're really looking to start from scratch and completely disconnect everything. That's entirely possible. You can click this and it'll disconnect all the objects here. They won't be tracked anymore. All right, so segment, branch, and pivot. I'm going to get into those a little bit later when we're talking about lineage tracing. For right now, every track has its own segment. Nothing branches off and nothing forks off. What I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to delete these spots. And I'm going to make a spot object just using all the default parameters here. All right. So now I have a really populated track editing window where you see it only has 15 out of 35 tracks being displayed. It says that right here, displaying only 15 out of 35 tracks. So why does it do that? Well, this feature is called focus tracks. And what it's really designed to do is when you have big data with hundreds, tens of hundreds, thousands of tracks, it lets this track editing viewer come up really quickly, and B, it just helps you find a little bit more about where you are in the data set and doesn't show you too much information all at once. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you uncheck this box, you'll see all the tracks that are available, and you can see where if you have, this is only 35, you can see where even if you had just had 100 tracks, this can get pretty big and it can be kind of hard to manage. So what focus tracks allows you to do is select just one track, like say this one, and you can click rebuild around selection. So what that does is it moves that track over here to the far left. You can see it here. And then what it does is it organizes the 15 closest tracks to it right here in the track editor. So it's basically saying if you're going to edit this track and cut it and attach things, it's probably going to be to one of these 15 tracks. Now, it can get a little hectic here with the track time points being vertical. I just want to mention that there is an Invert Access button here, and what that does is it makes your time points horizontal. So a lot of times, especially on wide screens, I find this helps a little bit more. Just going to make this a little narrower. That allows me to sort of see the entirety of the tracks, whereas previously I had to be scrolling up and down. I did want to point out, though, that if you do have multiple monitors, you can pop this whole side pane out. There's a little square button up here. And sometimes, since I do have multiple monitors, I'm not recording them, I can make this window really big, really wide, and I can see a lot of time points on one monitor, and then I'll be able to see my data set on the other monitor. So that's just a little pro tip there on how you can get more functionality out of the software when you're working, especially with really long time series. So let's just go through here, and I just want to make sure that we tracked this data set correctly. All right. So I'm going through here and I do see some breaks. I see some what I call drama going on. So here we can see that there's some things that might not be tracked correct. I got some broken tracks, some things going backwards and forwards, some little segments here. So let's see if we can make heads or tails of this, and let's see if we can figure it out. One thing right now is that these spots are about 10 microns in diameter. I'm just going to scale them down to about a quarter of that so I can really see the track. I just want to see a little tiny bit of it. And this can help whenever you're editing tracks, just to make these spheres a little bit smaller, especially when things get really close together, you'll still be able to tell them apart. All right, so it looks like what happened here, let's just follow one of these tracks, shall we? That track right there, it looks like, well, it looks like we had a little bit of a collision or an overlap, and things were not properly detected in these time points. All right, so this was the last time point that we had two objects. We had one here and one here. And actually, I'm going to just rebuild around the selection here so that I can see that all these tracks of interest are right around where I am now in this editing view. So this is the last time point where I had both spots. I'm going to go next, and I can see here, I didn't have two spots. I should have had two. I only detected one. I could go back and fix my detection, but if you just want to fix this little mistake, I can show you how to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is change it to mouse selects object. I'm going to go ahead and click this object, and I'm going to break the track right before it. All right, so we can see it's this object right here, and I've broken that track right before it. And actually, I'm going to go to the next time point, and the next time point, and the next time point. All right, right here, I have two spots again. So before that, I'm going to break as well. So I'm going to do mouse selects track. And now this little segment right here, from here to here, where it incorrectly detected one spot instead of two, I'm just going to go to the Edit tab, and, sorry, not duplicate, I'm going to delete those. All right, so I've got a break in my tracks and I've got to put spots there. So what I can do now is a little bit of what I did at the very beginning. I'm going to go here to the Edit tab. I'm going to click Auto Connect Selected Spot. And what I'm going to do is go back to the last frame that I have with a spot. I'm going to select that one, and then I'm going to come here, hold down Shift, and click, and click, and click. And now I have the rest of my track. So here's this step. And the very next step, ooh, I guess I missed one spot there. Let's put one there. All right, and now I have the very next step. So what I can do is take this track here and this track here, and I can join them. Now, it draws this really weird cross line here, but that's okay. What I can do is I can click Reorganize, and then it makes a straight track. All right, so let's say that that's the right track now. Now I got to fix this other one that shoots off, right? So I'm going to click on this one right here, and I'm going to go to the Edit tab. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to put a spot there, a spot there, a spot there, and now this one's already there, so I'm going to go to the Track Edit tab. I'm going to select, I already got that segment of that track selected. I'm going to select this track and this track, and I'm going to hit Join. And now, again, I have the weird connecting line, but I'm just going to click Reorganize, and now that track's straightened out. All right, so I was able to fix these two tracks. Looks like I still got one little issue here, and it takes place a little bit towards the end. So here, I got one that comes down, and you know what? I'm going to guess that with I'm going to guess this is a billiard ball moment, all right? So I'm going to guess that this one coming from the top actually bounces off and goes up in the upward direction. Again, you know, if you had a little bit better imaging, a little bit better resolution, you'd be able to resolve that. So what I'm going to do is come here to this time point. Actually, I'm going to come to this time point, and I'm going to break the track. And then we can see that from here to here to here to basically there. All right, so this segment right here should have been detected as 2, maybe not as 1. But you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different here. So let's go ahead and delete that segment. And let's go ahead and come back to our track editor. Now we see that we have this track segment, and I know it connects to this track segment, right? We have an empty space there. Well, if I don't mind not having data points there, what I can actually do is just connect them. You don't have to have a data point at every single time point. All right, and I can actually do the same thing with these two track segments and just connect them. And you see that there. I'm just going to click Reorganize. So now we see that these two tracks are complete. I still get accurate total displacement. I still get a pretty good mean velocity. So it really depends on what statistics you're looking for. If you're not necessarily looking to have a data value at every single time point, but you're looking for more overall statistics like motility or overall displacement, overall speed, overall velocity, then this is definitely an option for you. You can just connect the track segments that you know should go together, and you have a complete track. It's that easy. So when you look at the data, you won't get a 0 at that time point. You just get a no data value at that time point. So here we can go look, and we see track 11468. Oh, I think that's the wrong track. I think it was this one. Yep. So we can see here 1008. At this time point, there's no track data, no data element in this time point. And eventually, when this object comes back into play, here it is with the track ID 228. So again, track ID 228 at this time point, no data, no data, no data, no data. And then 228 comes back into play here. So yeah, but just like I said before, track straightness, anything like that, you get a value for that track, even though it's missing some data points there along the way. All right. So I'm going to go into, I just want to show you one last little feature here. We were going through the track editing, and there just so happens to be a couple of swimming algae that are dead. And we can see one of them here. He's not swimming around too much at all. We do see a little bit of jitter though. I don't know if you can notice that on the on the remote session here, but there is a little bit of jitter there. So if we want to correct for that jitter, and I'm just gonna rebuild around the selection. There's a little bit of jitter on that one. Let's see, do we have any other dead ones here? No, I think that's the only one there. Let's just go with this one. So if we have a spot like that, and let's say it's something dead that shouldn't be moving, let's say it's a fiduciary point that should be still, or a bubble or a speck of dust that we want to control for drift or anything like that. What we can do here is select that tracked object, and again, it could be automatically tracked, could be manually tracked, and we want to click Correct Drift. Now here it brings up a little window and it allows us to select between either correcting the image and selected objects, correcting the image and all objects, or doing a reference frame correction. I'm going to briefly explain all of these, but really the one that's best for you is incredibly dependent on your image and what your sort of end result is. So I highly encourage you to contact your local application specialist or salesperson if you think that drift correction could be something that you use to help get more accurate movement information out of your image. So we see a little diagram down here which gives you the three options for correcting your image data, including the entire result. That basically gives you no cropping at all. You'll get some zero padding around the edges whenever your drift is occurring. New size equal to current size might crop a little. It'll zero pad a little. The benefit of this is that your data set's going to remain the same size. Where include entire results, if you have a lot of drift, your data set could actually get considerably larger. And then crop to largest common region, that's going to crop the most, but it's not going to do any zero padding. So your image will look more, I guess, the most like it originally did. You won't have any black areas around the edge, but your data set can be smaller. That's benefit, maybe con. I don't know. It's really up to your data and what you're looking to quantify. Correcting the image and the selected object makes it so that the object is then still, this specific highlighted track. All objects will fix just this spot object, not any other objects. So I really suggest you do the drift correction first before any analysis is done. That way you know you're starting from a nice drift corrected image. And then there's also a reference frame correction. This doesn't change your image data at all. What this does is it adds a new frame of reference in your image that's centered on whatever tracked spot or surface or anything like that that you have. I believe reference frames are going to be covered a little bit later in one of our other webinars, but just know that that's another option to you if you don't want to actually change your data. All right. So that's how the drift correction and some of the manual tracking tools work. Now, we've been editing single tracks here, connecting them, disconnecting them, doing things like that. What I want to get into now is lineage tracks, which can get a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to go to the arena. I'm going to go to a different data set that I've prepared here. All right. Okay. So this is a 2D extraction of a 3D data set, and we see these cells dividing here. All right. Now I've downsampled this data for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of runtime, but just know that it's longer than this, and it's this is a little bit of a weird resolution since it's extracted. So what I've gone ahead and done, and this will be covered, I'm not going to go over the detection, this will be covered in the using cell, but I've went ahead and did a membrane-based detection on this data set so we could detect these cells. Now, when I did my original membrane-based detection, which you can see here, it wasn't perfect. It was pretty good, but not great. I did some tracking, but unfortunately there was a little blip at the very beginning right here. And this little blip threw off my lineage for the rest of time, right? And so it wanted to try to track part of some cells to that little blip, and that just wasn't right. So what I went in and did is I fixed the detection. I merged sections that should have been merged together. And we can see the result here. No more little blip, right? And in fact, this detection actually looks pretty good, right? No little blips, no cut cells, nothing like that. The problem was when I was changing all these objects, and this is true with surfaces, this is true with cells, this is also a little bit true with spots. When you've gone through a creation wizard and you've done your tracking, as soon as you start cutting cells, breaking them apart, fusing them together, you break the tracks. The tracks don't remain together. And so you don't get the benefit of sort of cutting everything apart and having it, automatically reconnect itself. So what you can do, though, is after you fix these objects to a state where you want to do it, you can either A, manually fix these, or B, automatically do it. So I'm going to show you the manual way first. This is how I was always taught. You always teach someone how to do something the hard way first, and then you show them the easy way. So I'm going to show you the manual way first, and then afterwards we'll go through the automatic way and see what the results look like. So let's just get started here, and I like a good challenge like this. It's almost like a little bit of a puzzle. So I'm going to select this one right here, and let's go ahead and do mouse selects track. So right off the bat, we can see that this object over here, right here, didn't get connected to that one because that's the one that I had to fix. So that's an easy one. I'm gonna hold down Control on a Mac. It's Command, and I'm gonna connect that. All right, so we see the connection there. We see the reorganization. So now I have the task of picking out this one and this one, which I know come from the same parent. So this one right here, and I want you to watch this, I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to select both this track and this track. And now I'm going to hit Connect Track. Now, it did the crazy little horizontal line here, but since this is a valid lineage, when I click Reorganize, it's going to give me an equidistant split here. And this is what I want to see. So now I'm going to go a couple more time points. And now I see another split. And thankfully, due to the fact that I don't have that many tracks, I know that this one and these right here are the same. So I'm going to click Connect Tracks here. I'm going to see what happened. All right. So here's our first challenge, right? Imaris didn't know who came from where. So if this isn't truly a genetically gifted triple split situation, we're going to have to do some sort of fine tuning and fixing here, right? Because these two didn't spontaneously split into this three. And actually what I think happened, and this is where the mouse selection comes into play, is that this one right here splits into that one and that one. And this one is carryover from before. So what I'm going to do is right here at this time point, I'm going to break that. And we see the break there. And actually right here as well, I'm going to break that one. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select with my mouse set to mouse selects segment, I'm going to select this segment at this time point, and then this segment at this time point. And actually, I think I might have lost an object or two along the way. So let's go back here and let's go ahead and break this one as well. And I'm going to go actually from here, I'm going to do mouse selects object. So I'm selecting this object in this time point. And then I'm going to select this. Oh yeah, this is that one and that one in this time point. And now I'm going to click connect. There we go. So from 16 to 17, I got the correct split. And now I can do the same thing here and connect those two objects. And when I reorganize, I get a better lineage. So now let's travel with this lower one and see at which point do we think it splits off. So this one right here, I would argue, is a split off of this lower one. So what I'm going to do is cut that one off. And then I'm selecting that segment, and I'm going to select this segment, and I'm going to join them. And then I'm going to reorganize. And now I have what appears to be a much more accurate lineage. Let's look at this here. I'm going to select branch, and now I can select this side and everything that's below it. So we can see that that one eventually splits into those two. Okay, I can still fix it down the line. And let's look at this one. I can see that one eventually splits into those two. All right. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to do here, and I just wanted to show you how the sort of lineage connect the dots type of system works. This is obviously a lot of editing and a lot of fixing, so my suggestion for a data set like this would be to go over here to the Magic Wand tab and click Cells Tracks. Now, what this is going to do is going to keep all of the edits to the objects that you did, and this is available for surfaces and spots and everything like that. You can just rebuild the tracking on something. You don't have to rebuild the entire object. So you can always go in, fix your objects, cut them, split them, merge them, delete a few, and you can always come back to the Magic Wand object tab here for your object and retrack it just from the tracking step. So I went ahead and did that, and this was my result. And I'm going to go here to the new result, and we can see the result of this rebuilt just the tracking step. And I was actually using the same tracking parameters that I used before. So we can actually see the parameters here: lineage tracking, max distance of 12 microns, max gap size of 2, no fill gaps. And that was actually, I think, identical, yeah, pretty exactly what I had used originally as well. So I didn't really have to change any of the parameters. I just had to do it again with the fixed objects in place. So now that I have all of these, this lineage completely tracked, I want to show you sort of what you can get from this, because it is color coded by time, but I did want to show that you can select a branch and you can see over time where all of the cells from a specific mother cell end up. So I think that's kind of interesting. They all end up on one side of it. There's sort of a rotational aspect to this that you could try to analyze. I'm going to go here to the stats tab and just show you some of the stats that we can get from the lineage tracking. We do have cycle duration. And so that for a specific track can give you exactly the duration of that cell cycle. We have cell track duration. We have cell track number of generations. So this one goes out to 5 generations. This one goes out to 4 generations. So there's a lot of different sort of time since previous division. This one's pretty useful as well. There's a lot of useful information here, right? It's giving it to you basically on a time point by time point basis. It can be a little difficult to sort of see and graph some of the higher level metrics. So what I went ahead and did is I took a stat. I just did cell generation here. So I took a cell generation, and here you can click on an individual cell. You can see it's generated. It's a second generation, and you see this little step graph. And in Imaris, we have a tool called Imaris Vantage where you can see this step graph a little bit better, but I wanted to do something above and beyond. So what I went ahead and did is I used this little floppy disk icon to export this data. And I exported it to an XLS. All right. You can see I already did that here, WH trop resample. So I already exported this data to an Excel spreadsheet. I'm actually going to bring that up right now. So here we go. This is basically what the export looks like. I did one modification to this export. I took this cell generation column, I copied it, and I inserted it. So I basically just duplicated this column on my own. That's something that I did after the fact, and I'll show you why I did that. So this gives us the generation of every single cell at every single time point. And so you see the time points are repeated here because we have multiple cells at each time point. You see the track ID. All of these first ones have ID 0, and all of these second ones have ID 221. So that means that these are just two separate lineages. Well, if I'm not interested in breaking this out by lineage, what I did is I went to Insert, and I inserted a pivot table, a brand new pivot table. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but I just wanted to show you sort of what the capabilities are when you get the data out from Imaris in this format. So I inserted pivot table, and I just selected the entire range and I added it as a new sheet. And so when I went to this pivot table and I click on it here, what I was able to do is select cell generation. Cell generation 2 is that second column that I made. This is really important. And time. That time was one of the columns that came with it. So I made time into my rows. So you see all the time points here. I made cell generation into my columns. So you see the different generations here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the default here is to do a sum of your cell generations. But what you can do here is just click on this, go to value field settings, and do a count instead. And so I did a count here, and what we can see is a count at each time point of how many cells there are of each generation. So here we have 2 zeroth generation cells. Here we have 4, 4, 4, 4. Here at this time point 12, we have 3 generation 1 cells and 2 generation 2 cells. And that kind of lines up with our tracking here, because if we look at this, not everything splits at the same time. So here we would have 1, 2, 3 of the generation 1, and then 2 from the subsequent split here at this time point right here. So that should be time point 12. Yep. So that lines up with our data. So because I'm able to sum this up and do a grand total here at the tail end, what we're able to do is to see how many cells we have at each time point. And so eventually we get 14 total cells, right? And 11 of them are at this stage, 2 of them are actually at this stage, 1 of them is actually at this stage. And so this is what we want to see. These cells double off, then these cells eventually all break off, and then these cells eventually all break off, and then so on and so forth. So what this indicates here, the trailing 1, is that maybe at some point we needed to split this one into something else, but maybe it didn't split off. It's just how the tracking algorithm works, whether something splits or something continues to be on its own. So this might have just been splitting in 3D and we just didn't notice because we had a 2D image. But what I wanted to show you is that because we get that count of cells, I just did 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Those are doubling numbers. And then what I entered here is a count if. Count if in column H, it's 2. Count if it's greater than 2 but less than or equal to 4, greater than 4 but less than or equal to 8, so on and so forth. You can automate this script to pick up these numbers. So what this shows me, and I have the time scale here because this is just the number of time points, this gives you the time between doubling. And when we just take an average of that, what we get is the mean time between doubling. So this can be a measure of how fast something's growing, how fast something is reproducing, anything like that, how fast a wound is healing, anything like that. So just to let you know that you can take this data out of Imaris and really get, a very high level statistic where you're adding, subtracting, counting, dividing, multiplying, doing stuff like that. Not necessarily built into Imaris, but it's pretty easy to get that information out to a spreadsheet and then just enter in a couple equations to get the data that you're looking at. All right. So yeah, now we're really tracking. Now we're getting some really high level stats with our lineage tracking. So one last thing that I wanted to touch on here, beyond just doing this track editing, rebuilding the tracking, and doing things like that, is the role that some of our distance measurements can play in helping you track things better. So I'm actually going to not save this, and I'm going to go back to one of my other data sets. I'm going to go back to this one right here. All right. So in this data set, I'm just going to bring up my display adjustment, Control D there. What I'm going to do is I'll play through this real quick. And so we see we have two sort of lineages here. And we got cells going all over the place. All right. Now, what I want you to notice too, though, and this is just another little pro tip, is that this red channel has a lot of bleed through. So what I did was some simple channel arithmetics. I did channel 1 minus channel 2, and I got channel 3. So on channel 3, I detected these cells, which I'm going to call the target cells. And I did the tracking on this, and I can go over this if you have any questions about your data set and you have lots of bleed through. You can just email us support@bitplane.com. We can show you all these different tricks of doing channel arithmetics before your detection, how you detect these cells, how you track them, doing things like that. So yeah, so I detected these target cells, and for a data set like this, a question that we often get is, I just want to track the green ones that are coming in contact with these target cells. I want to know how much time they're spending in contact, things like that. And what's really nice about Imaris 9.5 is that it's a lot easier to get that contact information out. So I went ahead and tracked all of these active cells, right? And we've got all of these cells going all over the place, and we can see those tracks. And I'm actually just gonna do a shorter dragon tail here of just maybe 100 seconds. All right, so yeah, just shorter dragon tails here, and we can see them jumping around and being tracked around. So what I want to do is filter these out. Now, like I showed you before, editing these things after tracking will break the tracks, but you can always rebuild the tracking, either by going to the magic wand here and rebuilding the tracks, or just fixing them yourselves. Also, during the detection step, you can limit what you're tracking altogether. So I'm actually going to show you what that looks like here. So I'm going to rebuild this object all the way from the beginning, from the surfaces. And right here at the very first step of my object detection, if I know that I'm going to want to be filtering something based on when it comes into contact with something else or anything like that, I want to make sure I have this shortest distance calculation button checked, the little checkbox checked. Frankly, I want to go to my target cells on the edit tab, and I want to make sure it's checked for that as well. Now it's checked by default for like the first 4 objects, I think, but after that it unchecks it just to improve runtime. But you want to make sure that this is checked for anything that you want to measure the distances between. So both what you're tracking and the target there. So now that I know that I have that box checked, I'm going to hit next, input my detection parameters, my smoothing level, etc. I'm going to do my threshold and use my seed points here. And now, for my seed points, it uses the seed points to split apart the surfaces. This is homeschool 101 here, not 201. So that's because it's a little more complicated to calculate because doing it for the entire time series. But We can filter out a number of voxels. That's the default filter. So we're just getting rid of tiny things, but we can add a second filter. And by default, it's area. It's just the first thing listed alphabetically. But if we scroll down, we get to S, and it says shortest distance to surfaces. Surfaces equals target cells. That's the one I want to pick. And here we actually have a histogram of the distance of all of these objects to the target cells. I'm going to turn those on for a second. So we see here that when we're only picking the high values, we're taking only everything that's far away from the target cells. I'm going to turn off that threshold and turn on this one. And now when I'm picking low values, I can basically say I want everything that comes within 10 microns of one of my target cells. I can even be picked here. Let's go with 5 microns of my target cell. All right, so what this is doing is only selecting objects that are coming within 5 microns of the target cell. You can actually put 0 here, and 0, and you can see a little spike there, 0 is only going to give you objects that are overlapping with your target cell. So this is even more focused on things that are coming in contact. You can go negative, and so negative is only things that are completely inside. All right, so as you go further and further into something, the value becomes towards the edge of the membrane, right? So it's a larger negative distance. So yeah, you can certainly put 0 here, and you can only have objects that are coming into contact with these target cells. I'm just going to do 5 microns because in this experiment it just works a little bit better, gets me a bit more to work with. So now that I have that, I'm going to click Next. We do have the edit step in the wizard, and now I get a tracking step. So now, instead of tracking absolutely everything in this time series and having to sort through all of those tracks, I'm now hyper-focused on just the cells that I'm interested in, just the ones that are coming really close to my target cells. So, and I can also use this fill gaps with all detected objects. If you have little gaps between your tracks, this can help. If not, you might want to uncheck this, because if you are applying the constraint that I only want objects that are within 5 microns, you don't want to accidentally throw in an object that might be 6 microns away. So I would uncheck that box if you're trying to be really judicious here. So we're going to go ahead and click Next, and we have all of these things tracked. Now we do have the option of filtering out things that are only in contact for one time point, so that track didn't really exist. Or we don't even have to filter at this step. We can keep absolutely everything. Sometimes that's what I like to do. So here, I'm going to go ahead and finish that, and we can see that we only have these active cells tracked. All right. As I play through this, it might look a little jumpy, might look a little skittish, but what I can do is go to the stats and I can see track duration. And instead of specific values, I'm actually going to go to average values. And I'm going to go here to, I passed it, track duration. And I can actually see the mean track duration in seconds of these objects. So what does that tell me? That tells me on average, these cells, those active cells that I've been tracking, on average come in contact with a target cell for about 297 seconds. Obviously a very large standard deviation. Some of them only touch for one time point, some of them touch for a lot of time points. This is just to show you the capabilities of the software, right? This is just to show you that you can use these filters beforehand to A, make your analysis a lot faster because you're limiting the amount that you're putting through that tracking protocol, and B, get you to a number like mean duration of contact time really fast. You don't have to use an extension. You don't have to use any other, Excel or anything. You can get that number just from here from Imaris. And I just wanted to show you this one too. This is another result where I filtered and then I retracked based on that. And so we can see here that there are quite a bit of tracks here, quite a bit of tracks of things that come in contact. But you can see that even for an object like this, we just get the time points where it was probably out here. Yep, there it is out in the distance. And then as soon as it comes into contact, we track it right there. And we know it's in contact for 1, 2, 3 time points, just a little bit there. It's within 5 microns. That's my 5 micron barrier there. And then after that, it's too far. It moved away already. So we can see that it is actually doing its job, and it is actually giving you, the fact that this cell was in contact for a really short period of time. Vice versa, you can come over here to one of these longer ones, and if you have trouble finding something, you can always center to selection. I can see it here. This one right here, it is going to remain really close to this one right here for a really long time. And you can see it kind of just embeds itself there, and it's hanging out for a while. So this one is in contact for a really long time. So looking at the stats for the one that I fully retract, we can look at track duration here, and we can see that the mean duration for this one, I was a little more thorough in this one, is actually 677, and the standard deviation is smaller than that. So the time scale here is a little off. It's not the best time resolution, but you can definitely get a sense of which ones are in contact and which ones are not. And yeah, you can do downstream analysis and say, okay, well, all the ones that have a really long duration, let's take a look at their intensities. Is their intensity going up? Is their intensity going down? Or is their volume going up, volume going down? So you can, of course, filter by a track duration, which is going to be duration in contact. All right. So that's a lot of things we can do with tracking, a lot of things we can do with the track editor here, breaking tracks, unifying tracks, selecting individual segments, focusing the tracks. I did show you correcting drift, and then I also showed you how you can export the data and make your own plot. So I really hope this was helpful in sort of explaining what the track editor does, how it works, how you can fix things and manually create things. There's a whole lot more you can do since tracking applies to spots, surfaces, cells, and filaments. We didn't even touch on tracking filaments. If you have questions about any of those, feel free to email ussupport@bitplane.com. We'll be more than happy to help you out. All right. Thank you.
Oh,
So we had a few questions, right?
yes. So thanks, Danielle. That was great. I think I might have had a little bit of a audio issue on my end. Sorry about that. So yeah, we have a few questions that I wanted to go through. So the first ones came in from Magdalena and Orly asking about it's in reference to the reference frame and asking if you can pick a point that you can measure directionality in reference to that, or yeah. So that's
Right,
the first one.
yeah. So definitely, that is definitely possible. So I briefly mentioned reference frames there, and I can take the same data set here and just use the same or dead algae here to go back into my tracks. And we see we have this track here. And this can either be done manually or automatically, and that is inserting a reference frame. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a reference frame here. And we see that it actually adds a reference frame object up here. And it actually adds the reference frame in here. And what that allows me to do, I'm going to go back to my spots. I'm going to just turn off the tracking for now. And I'm going to increase the scale back to 1. So we have all these spots. And these spots now have a stat for them. I'll go to the stats tab here. And it is going to be, we can do distance from origin. And actually, I'm just gonna go to my stats here and make sure I have everything checked that I want to show.
Mm-hmm.
And click OK. And here we can see distance from origin of the reference frame. So all these spots, and I can use that same stat to color code. Distance from the origin of the reference frame here. And so we can see which ones are further away and which ones are closer to a specific object. So this object can be a specific cell or a specific boundary or something that you manually draw or anything like that. So that's how, I guess that's the main way that I would use to pick a point to measure directionality in reference to that. And like I said before, you can either manually place this or you can automatically place this reference frame wherever you'd like. So you can manually adjust this reference frame to be just the tip of something or something like that.
Okay, thanks, Daniel, for going through that. And then just you can just give the answer in just words, but Orly was asking, so if we do use a reference frame, is that reference frame able to help us with intravital imaging where you have a heart beating or breathing? And yeah, and how would that, what are
Yeah,
some things to think
for
about
sure.
with that?
Yeah, so the drift correction can go in any direction, right? So it doesn't have to be quote unquote drift per se. It can be motion that's oscillating. It can be twitching. It can be anything like that. So yeah, as long as you can sort of establish some sort of fiduciary point that you want to be fixed throughout the time series, the drift corrections can sort of correct for that motion.
Okay, awesome. So another person, Lucas, was asking about, is it possible to track single migrating cells, but those that are within a cell sheet? And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about really object detection and what kind of objects you need to have to be able to do the tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of all comes back to Nyquist. I don't know if I have a good example here of some really thick cells, but I haven't tracked this one yet. But even cells that are like this that are really scrunched together, the key is going to be your object detection, right? And so what you need is to be able to resolve your objects as separate entities. And so this, if we can come in here and either use the membrane detection like I used before, or use the spots or use surfaces using seed points to split apart your objects. As long as you can resolve an independent cell through time and it's not blurred into the background or it's not completely squished together with an entire mass of other cells, as long as it's resolved as a separate entity and you can place either a spot or surface on it, yeah, we can track that individual particle through time.
Yep, exactly. Got to be able to find an object first, and then you can track it. And that was a beautiful image. Okay, so then let's see. Orly had another question, and it was if you go through and you have to do some manual editing, and you showed us how to do that manual editing, is it still possible to get that shortest distance calculation and to do the filtering? And yeah, is that still
Yep.
something that's possible?
So yeah, I'll answer that question. Also provide a little pro tip here. So the shortest distance calculation is sort of kind of like an intrinsic measurement. So it's intrinsic to every single little surface element that we have in this data set. So whether it's part of a track or whether it's broken off, it will always have that measurement of shortest distance to the target cells. Now, if it's not part of the track, obviously you don't get the track information and things like that, but it's sort of intrinsic to that little blob. And that is goes hand in hand with here in the edit tab where I showed you this little checkbox. So one thing that I did want to point out though is that if you do plan on doing a lot of jumping around and breaking things apart, maybe deleting objects, adding objects, merging objects, fusing objects, it might make sense to temporarily uncheck this box. And that way, not everything in this scene is getting calculated distances to everything in here. And then once you're done editing your objects and putting them back together, as soon as you check this box and go back to the stats tab, you'll see that it runs through the calculation again. And then it applies this sort of intrinsic distance value to all of the objects again, sort of a fresh start. So yeah, that measurement's always sort of baked into each object.
Yep, exactly. That is a great little pro tip that you offered there. So you don't keep having lots of things recalculating in the
Mhm.
background.
And
I'm glad you
I
shared
did
that
see
one.
another question there too, Meredith, just while I'm on that topic. If I
Yeah.
go to this little wrench and screwdriver icon, I don't know if you can see it, it's in the bottom left corner. It is a shortcut to going to File, Preferences, Statistics, and that actually gives you a list of everything that Imaris is capable of calculating. So, and you can see by default, I don't have everything checked. Some things like acceleration are a little more computationally intensive, so I uncheck them for runtime purposes, but there are a lot of different statistics here that you can do. And so by default, a lot of these are for the object, but if something's tracked, you can see track, the word track before it. So track displacement, track duration, track intensities. So just because the intensity center mean isn't shown, that doesn't mean that we're not capable of calculating that for you. So I just wanted to point out that there's a lot here on offer in case you're looking for a specific stat that's not there by default.
Yep, exactly. Way to cover multiple questions at once. Thanks, because we did have that one. Okay, I think just one last thing pretty quickly at the end. We had some questions about just the coloring of objects versus tracks,
Mhm.
and I guess I just want to make sure that we've made that clear for everyone how that's controlled and sort of what your options are for the coloring.
Right, yeah, I'm going to go back to a less busy image here. I didn't really touch
Yeah.
on coloring much at all, but that's a good thing to touch on. So when we're looking at, I'm just going to make these a little bit bigger. So when we look at the color tab for a tracked object, we do have a drop down here at the very top. So we get independent coloring of both the points and the tracks. So for the points, that's the little spheres here, we could do a track ID color coding, and that basically gives every spot a different color throughout the entire time series. So that's useful, especially if you turn off the tracks. You can still keep track of which spot is which throughout the track. We do also have statistics-based color coding. So I can color code the spot based on, let's say, its acceleration or its speed or something like that. And we can see that the colors of these spots actually change. So when they go faster, when they go slower, the speed tends to change. Then if I go down to tracks, you'll see that the default color coding is time mapped. So they're blue in the beginning and they go towards redder at the end. But I can also color code the tracks by track ID so that each track is a different color. You can also statistics color code a track, and this one's kind of cool because you can see where in the track something's accelerating and where in the track something is non-accelerating. And so that's independent color coding for both types of things there.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's a really great overview and hopefully helps everyone when they get to the stage of having tracked everything and wanting to look at the results and to look at them in a more visual way maybe than looking at a table or an Excel or something like that. So I think that's going to be it for the questions today. Thank you so much, Daniel. You did a great job with the presentation as well as with answering the questions. And thank you to everyone that joined us today for the webinars. We do know that you are busy, so we appreciate you tuning in to all of these. Next week, we're going to have Matthew Gastinger, also from the Americas support team. He's going to go over different ways of looking at colocalization within your images. And so he will come with lots of pro tips of his own for that. If you haven't registered, please reach out to your local rep or to me, and we'll make sure that you have access to that registration form so you can join us next week. And of course, you can go to our Learning Center and search for homeschool and find all of the webinars that we've given so far in the homeschool series. So yeah, thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Take care. See you next week. Bye-bye.